Hi, everyone. My name is Matt McCauley. I'm Vice President of the Kirkland Heritage Society. And this evening, we're trying something a little bit new. We are recording a presentation. This is actually our second run through this particular presentation, but we will also be having a part two coming up after this so that you can see the rest of it. Tonight, we're going to be looking at Kirkland's origins as the town of Kirkland, the town site that was platted in 1888. And while there were some settlers already on the east side of Lake Washington, it all really centered around a British iron and steel manufacturer who came to the United States and decided to set up a steel mill here in conjunction with some prominent Seattle personalities and even some national financial figures. So while the steel mill was never constructed, we're taking a look tonight at what was planned, what it would have been had it actually been completed. And for that, tonight we've assembled a panel of experts who are going to share some of their insights and research that has taken place over many, many years now. Starting it off, we're going to go to Kent Sullivan, who's going to take it from there.
So briefly, this is what we're going to cover over the two sessions. We'll go through the section called the middle in this presentation, and we'll pick up with the collapse next time. All right, so let's talk just briefly about the location. Where in the heck was this steel mill going to be? Because you sure can't tell today. So we have some initial sources that we used to get an idea, and then we were able to verify some things on the ground, as I'll show you. One of these on the left is a map out of a report that was put together for the Northern Pacific Railroad as it became the Northern Pacific Railway, coming out of bankruptcy in 1895, 1896. And you could see kind of the general location. You can sort of see that there's a railroad line running north-south, and some of it's completed in the solid lines, and some of it is not complete in the dash lines. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then we came across a Northern Pacific map that was given as part of a set to the state of Washington in 1917. And on it, there's this ghost where near the red arrow of an earlier railroad line that really intrigued us. The one in yellow on the left is a segment of the line that is now the Cross-Kirkland Corridor. But on the right there, it was very intriguing because there's a big wide spot near the tip of the arrow, and that usually means extra tracks. And so we thought that might be meaningful, and turned out it was really meaningful. So at this point, it was really Matt and me who were poking around trying to make sense out of all this. And so we did some really relatively straightforward things. We looked at the King County aerial imagery on the left there from 1936-37. And we looked at the Sanborn map that had been made in, was it 1891, I think, 1892. And we'd laid some pieces over the map and tried to scale them a little bit. You can see the kind of the white and the yellow overlay there. And then we also, from some other sources, realized that the property from the original platting that had been done was a little off compared to the street grid. They did the best they could with the surveying tools they had in those days. And then we drew the blue line where the original railroad line was. And then also looked at that in modern day imagery. So you can see on the right there, we're at the Northeast 85th interchange, which is, even today things change pretty dramatically. So that Cloverleaf interchange is mostly gone as of January 2025. It's being rebuilt in a different way. But that's where a lot of it was. You can see the blue line coming in at the top and stopping, and the highway takes up a lot of the area where the right-of-way was. And the biggest structure you're looking at is Costco. And Petco that is now closed, and that area will be redeveloped, is kind of on the way to the front door of the mill, as we'll see coming up. So I'll be back later to talk to you some more, but it's really fabulous to have Sandy Middleton as part of our team. She's written an amazing biography of Peter Kirk, and frankly, the publication of her book really reinvigorated our research, and she's done some really deep research, and she's going to talk to us about who Peter Kirk was. Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you, Kent. Several generations of Kirk blacksmiths and iron foundries preceded the birth of Peter Kirk in 1840 at the dawn of the Victorian era that inspired the Second Industrial Revolution. From an early age, he worked in the family ironworks alongside his brothers, father, grandfather, uncles, and cousins. As a young man, his family moved north to Workington, where he and his brothers started a new ironworks. After a bumpy start trying to align the specific chemistry of the local ores with the family's historical process, they gained a reputation for making superb wrought iron in the area. In his mid-20s, Peter experienced a series of life-changing events. First, he married Mary Ann Quirk, the daughter of a successful shoemaker. They had 9 children, 8 of whom came to America with them. Mary Ann was involved with some of Peter's business ventures. She had her own investment portfolio and was instrumental in buffeting the family through the hard times with her inheritance. Second, Peter left the family business to branch out with his brother-in-law, Charles James Valentine. Their ironworks evolved into the Moss Bay Hematite Iron and Steel Company, one of the first Bessemer steel plants in northwest England. He strove for efficiency in his ironworks. For example, early on, his plant was one of the first to use ladle cars to directly transport the molten ore from the blast furnaces to the Bessemer converters. This eliminated the need to reheat the pig iron in steel production. He captured the waste heat from the blast furnaces to fuel 25 of the 30 boilers that powered the many machines on site. He used the latent heat of cooling ingots to make an oven to cool them evenly, which in turn increased their quality. This company lasted over 100 years, despite England's diminishing market share that plagued the country starting in the late 19th century. I believe it was able to survive in part through Peter Kirk's many innovations he put into the mill during his time. The third life-changing event happened when Peter was 26 years old. He registered the first of over a dozen patents that mainly addressed fuel and labor savings, but also included new rail products. His patents addressed every phase of steel production, from simple but uniquely designed grates which preserved embers from the blast furnace, to the mechanism that automatically fed coal to continuously fuel that fire, to the oven to temper the reheat, to the complex rolling mills to get as many rolls with one heat of the ingots as possible. His many inventions included finished products such as special tram rails and steel sleepers and their hardware. Remember, sleepers are what we call railroad ties. The latter reduced the amount of fuel used and made it faster for the railroad companies to install. Moss Bay was world-renowned for its innovations and quality products. They enjoyed international success with Moss Bay rails laid all over Great Britain and many of its Commonwealth nations. They supplied rails to build the Canadian Pacific Railway, many lines in the United States and Mexico. In 1886, Moss Bay shipped 250,000 steel sleepers to India alone. Yet Britain started losing market share to the U.S. as America went gangbusters on their continental expansion. The U.S. imposed high tariffs on foreign iron and steel, making it even harder for the European producers. Peter Kirk came to America in 1886 to investigate how to gain a foothold in its exploding development, with the possibility of building a subsidiary. He planned a grand tour of the best industrial plants. When visiting the Pennsylvania mills, he was asked about his purpose and mentioned that, quote, business was so dull in England that they had to come to America to see what was the cause of it. Kirk further explained, a new era has dawned for America, and I'm afraid a period of darkness for England. with the facilities of cheap coal, natural gas, easily accessible oil, and limitless abundance of freight transportation, England can no longer compete with America in iron products. End quote. However, Moss Bay did have an order for several tons of rails, which intrigued Kirk. Located on the west coast, the Seattle Lakeshore and Eastern Railroad had included ore analysis for the Denny mines with their order. Kirk added an extension to his fact-finding mission to cross the continent to Washington Territory. Once there, Kirk saw opportunity. It was 1,600 miles closer to western U.S. lines that needed periodic replacements and were also expanding. He also calculated the untapped exposure to emerging markets in Asia, Central and South Americas. Kirk's initial assessment of the needed materials and logistics proved hopeful to build a steel mill in the area, but there were challenges. He got tangled up in the frontier town rivalry between Seattle, who controlled the best iron deposits, and Tacoma, who controlled the most rail infrastructure with Northern Pacific Railroad. To have access to high quality but limited iron ore, he had to make Seattle the place of production and distribution. But Northern Pacific had the railroad miles connecting Tacoma and a huge ore deposit in Cle Elum to its advantage. Kirk's status as an immigrant also caused wrinkles in his plan. He had many backers in England, but if the new company was funded mainly with foreign capital, the law considered it foreign and subject to the tariffs Kirk was trying to avoid. Big problems were overcome with the help of Lee S.J. Hunt, and in the summer of 1888, frantic work began in building the fledgling town of Kirkland and its mill site. Kirk bought and stored on site about 5,600 tons of machinery and supplies. He also bought a coal mine and brokered a deal with Northern Pacific Railroad to hedge his bets.
All right. Thank you, Sandy. So I'm going to give you glimpses at a few of the pieces of research materials we've uncovered and how they help tell the story. And then we're going to actually show you a model of the steel mill site, which is really cool and exciting, something we've not tried to do before in our research. Okay, so I think it's probably obvious from what Sandy was saying, but just to underscore it, in 1887, 1888, Kirkland was truly frontier land. There's a Polk directory of 1888 of King County. Now, Polk directories in later years were of, just single cities, but this was an entire King County, and even so, in 1888, it was only 12 pages long. That's how few people lived here. And it didn't even list Kirkland as a place. It did list the communities of Houghton and Juanita, which now today, of course, are part of modern-day Kirkland. And at this time, supplies were shipped across the lake by steamboat. And we have some examples from some historical materials that the Northern Pacific Railway Historical Association has of these freight bills. And you can see in the blue box here, Kirkland is the destination, care of the Lower Maud, which was one of the steamboats that was used for that activity. There really weren't any roads, and there certainly was not a railroad yet. So it's crazy to imagine today, although one thinks maybe when stuck in traffic on Highway 520 that a steamboat might be faster. Originally, there were intended to be a mill company, which, the steel mill, and also a land company. As with many such endeavors, there was a company that managed all the land and platting it, selling it, or leasing it, and in some cases doing basic clearing. So that was the case here. You had the Moss Bay Iron and Steel Company, and you had the land company that was connected, the Kirkland Land and Improvement Company. And we've dug up things like the incorporation documents and things like that. You can see a snippet of that here on this slide. And also, one of the very, very first industries was a lumber company. The people who launched this endeavor seemed to realize that there was going to be trees and lots of them, and more than they were going to actually need to use for the project itself. So they were hoping to monetize some of the trees in the area. So this is very, very early times we're talking about here, just as Kirkland was getting off the ground. So Matt mentioned that the incorporation of the town was originally in 1888, and the first idea, the first design that was on the 1888 town plat was to have the mill down at lake level, about where Kirkland Urban is today, and stretching into where the ball fields are. Basically, Northern Pacific said, we're not going to build a huge long spur down a steep hill to your mill. We're up here on the hill where it's not as steep for us to come and go. So you better move your mill. So in 1890, that in fact did happen. We can see here. This is the original plat. You can see the outline of the mill at lake level. And in fact, Mike's going to be talking about what we've learned from this drawing. It's actually been quite useful as a source. So also, it wasn't just about the mill and a few industries. It was also about the town and how people would live, what living conditions would be like, and what the community would be like. So Sandy mentioned Kirk and his entourage extending their trip to the west, and on their way west, they visited the Pullman company town in Pullman, Illinois, that made railroad passenger cars, and they were very impressed by what they saw of the planned community there, with modern, safe, clean housing that was built to last. And they were very family oriented in who they hired. They did not want a Wild West town where there was lots of boozing and lots of people getting in trouble. And also speculation was going to be explicitly prohibited, as it was in Pullman. If the land company or the mill company owned a lot of the housing, then it wouldn't, be run up in price to try to make a quick buck. This was something Sandy researched for her book. There are very limited papers left, unfortunately. Nothing from the mill company or the land company, but there are a few notes in the Peter Kirk files at the University of Washington. And these are some little screen snippets of doodling he was doing, notes he was making as he visited various places. So this was not a flash in the pan sort of project, or, just trying to make a good show and then fleece people. They were very, very serious about doing this. So as you can see here, Kirk took over 50 samples of iron ore, coal, clay, and limestone, all ingredients needed to making steel, and visited a lot of places that had promise of one or more of these items. I've listed them here, but clear up into lower mainland BC, out on San Juan Island, or in the San Juan Islands on Lopez and San Juan. So they were really trying to figure out how this was going to work. Another key player here was the Lake Washington Beltline Company. So remember, we're before the Alaska Gold Rush that really put Seattle on the map. There were some ambitious Seattle businessmen who wanted to grow and develop Seattle, and not knowing that the gold rush was coming, they were looking for other ways to cause that growth to happen. So one of the things going on here was the limits of having an extractive economy were being reached. Coal exports were starting to decline in the late 1880s, early 1890s. And lumber, which became huge later, most of it in this time frame was out on the Olympic Peninsula. and didn't need to come through Seattle. So there wasn't any value add that Seattle could provide, and it didn't cause any growth for Seattle. So the idea that they came up with was to create essentially an industrial corridor down the entire east shore of Lake Washington. And just stop and think for a minute how different our lives would be today if that had ever been built. Imagine instead of houses and beautiful views and a nice parkway along the east shore of Lake Washington, we had giant businesses with big smokestacks. It would have been a very, very different place. So we have Lee S.J. Hunt, who was also the owner of the Seattle PI newspaper, James McNaught, who was also the general counsel in Seattle for the Northern Pacific Railroad, Jacob Firth, a very early and successful businessman, and several others. The company was incorporated on July 3rd of 1890, and they thought that the steel mill would be the perfect way to kickstart the enterprise. And so the reason it's called Lake Washington Beltline Company is they were going to facilitate that corridor happening by building a rail line. And then, everything would be fed from there. They were bringing raw materials to build those businesses and then ship raw materials in for those businesses and take the finished stuff away. So it was part and parcel of making this happen. It does not appear to have, they didn't really think that they would be able to raise the capital to get it done on their own. So the Northern Pacific was involved very early on, even though they weren't necessarily mentioned publicly all the time. But there's various papers we've uncovered that make it clear that appealing to the NP and having them involved was very important. Okay, so now we're kind of in the things are really starting to get going. We've called that simply the middle. So there was a reorganization that took place. The details of this are in Sandy's book, and she lays it out really well. But Moss Bay Iron and Steel became the Great Western Iron and Steel Company. There was a bunch of spending to get the mill off the ground, and lots of transportation spending to serve the mill. So the portions of the belt line that were built during this time. A lot of sunk costs because there wasn't really any immediate industry to start serving to start making that money back, which was fairly uncommon for the Northern Pacific. If they couldn't make a rail line start paying and even come close to paying it back within 2 to 3 years, they generally did not move forward. And this was kind of an exception. Okay, so briefly now what I'm going to do is just walk you through some of the kinds of evidence we've uncovered, because this sort of effort is very much requires triangulation across many different sources, and all this stuff fed into the work that Mike's going to show you with the CAD model. So we have photos, many kinds of them. This is what I would call a scene image. It shows a large area, and we're going to kind of dissect this photo in a little bit. But this particular batch of photos is amazing. They're from glass plate negatives. They have lots and lots of resolution. Kirkland Heritage Society had some of these, and then we stumbled upon them. It's a really great story for another time, the details of it. But basically, we found a bunch for sale down in Centralia, Chehalis, and we're able to get them for the society. So that really provided a whole new dimension and much more understanding of what was going on at the mill and how much got built. Here's another example of a scene image. Here we're looking across the lake. You can see the little bit of the belt line there in the right foreground. We're going to look at this photo in detail as well as we go on. Another one here showing some felling of logs, and there's all kinds of interesting detail here too. We're going to talk about this little building in the back left, for example, that we had never seen before. Really great stuff. And then finally, some modern day scene images. This is a little berm that is still in existence in Kirkland today, and that was really helped us locate some of the structures. And then there are detail images, things that are really zoomed in on buildings, that there's just real amazing amounts of detail if you really pick it apart about what's going on and at what stage they were at. And another one here, looking across the job site, we can see some buildings here that we don't see in other photos. So really great stuff. Here's another one. Matt and I dug through all of the property tax photos from 1937, 38, 39, that era, at King County Historic Property Tax Photos at the State Archive on the Bellevue College campus. And we found some evidence in the back here where this red arrow is. You can see a raised area. That is the remains of part of the Beltline right-of-way that was raised, because of course railroads don't go up and down dips. You smooth things out and put fill underneath when you need to keep it at the right elevation. And other things, LiDAR, for example. Felix Bunnell helped us think about using this, and thank you to Felix for that. We found this really interesting little item here in the LiDAR that we're going to talk about later, but it's another great source of info. And then there's a small class of images that I call like. So pictures of things that are not from Kirkland, but are from a similar area that help inform what thing at Kirkland might have looked like. These are beehive ovens for making coke out of coal, and the steel mill needed a lot of those. And this is down south at Durham and Black Diamond, that area. So not too far away, and about the same time frame. And then there's lots of different kinds of drawings. This is the 1892 Sanborn map of Kirkland. Is very small because there wasn't a lot of development, but there are pieces here that we were able to use. You have to know how to read these and take these apart and then kind of glue them back together. It says so many 100 feet from here to here, and you have to, stretch things out to make it all fit. And yeah, just barely. And then here, that little bit of the map was all there was that had to do with the steel mill, but it did tell us a lot. And then the right-of-way map for the Interstate Commerce Commission that I mentioned, 1917, we've looked at that before. That was a great help. And then Matt and I traveled to the Minnesota Historical Society a few years ago, and they had these lovely, very large linen maps of the Beltline right-of-way. This was what was supposed to be built. What actually was built was a little bit different, but you can see here the right-of-way, and that really helped inform us. And it shows a couple of tracks in one place, and that really was very, very helpful. And then there are sketches of buildings and things that were intended, and they weren't completely fanciful, as it turns out. Mike really analyzed these and got quite a bit of information about it. This is sort of the same place as the photo that was looking across the lake with the train tracks in the right foreground. But this was a tract written by Anderson. It was around 50 pages, I think, and it really goes into detail about what was planned. And then we have a bunch of newspaper clippings from the Seattle Times, Seattle Post-Intelligencer, and from a newspaper called the Kirkland News that was published by the Land and Improvement Company. We don't have a lot of that, but there was a Kirk family member that received the paper, I think, all the way back in England. So it was, of course, delayed in time, and clipped out a lot of things and put them in a scrapbook, which we now have at the Kirkland Heritage Society. And those are the only, except for the first issue, those are the only known snippets left from that newspaper. So really, really valuable stuff. And then again, that Anderson tract I mentioned from 1891, there's a copy of this in the Kirk files of the University of Washington. And then there was a master's thesis in history written for a student named Sherrard, William Sherrard, who went on to be a history professor in another part of the country back east. But he wrote his thesis in 1958 on the steel mill, and he talked to several people, and it was really great information. And we were able to follow up on a lot of what he did. It gave us a lot of really good hints and clues. And then those freight bills that I mentioned, there's 102 of them in total that have some sort of steel mill related equipment or supply being shipped in, and that was really helpful. And it really lined up nicely with what we saw in the newspaper clippings, which was great. And this was an amazing find. There are two letterpress books in the Horace Henry files at the University of Washington Special Collections. Henry was part of Henry and Balch and Henry and Shepard, and they were the first, and for a long time, the biggest heavy earth moving big construction project company in Seattle. They had moved out. Horace had moved out from the Twin Cities. And so most of what was in these letterpress books were simple, receipts for things, but there was actually this contract for building the train depot there by the steel mill, which is the only evidence we've found so far about what sort of depot it was to be. And it was a standard plan for the Northern Pacific, so we knew then what it would look like, which was a huge, huge find. And yeah, if you don't have a lot of practice reading cursive writing from 125 years ago, it can be a challenge to read. And then there was a wonderful local history book, most of it based on oral history, written by Arlene Ely many years ago now, called Our Foundering Fathers, which is a great pun. Good job, Miss Ely. And then we have the book I mentioned before by Sandy, which is a really wonderful book. And if you don't own it, you should go buy it now. I'm going to stop talking here. And this is just a slide to kind of show you the basic scope of what Mike is going to show you in part one here with the CAD model, but it's what we call phase one. We don't know what the mill company might have called their phases of construction, because again, none of their documents have survived, but it was helpful to us to break things out into phases because there's a lot of complexity here. So yeah, and Mike's going to show us everything in the CAD model from here on. So I'm going to stop sharing the slides, and then Mike can share and continue.
So I got tasked with the job of making a model for this. And while we're calling it a model and I'm doing it in a CAD tool, functionally it's a map. So just people understand that. So one of the things that the CAD tool allows us to do, for example, is bring in pictures. For example, okay, and I didn't want to show the other one yet. This one, for example, the aerial map. So we can bring this into the model. We know from the plat maps what the distance between the roads are, so I can scale them. So in this model that we built, everything is actually full size. So this was scaled to be full size. And then the idea is that, for example, if we want roads and other features and things, we can just trace over the top of it. And so we did that, and we started to do that. And what I'm going to show is out of chronological order. So I'm going to show the development of what we found for the belt line first, and then we'll show you what we learned or started with and then learned about the mill site as we go along. Every one of these pictures has got some kind of issue with it. I'm not going to go into the details on it now, but things are supposed to be straight lines and they're not. There's distortions and you name it. It's a photocopy of a 100-year-old piece of paper or a photocopy of a 100-year-old piece of linen. So, there's a lot of variation, but it's close enough so that we can tell a story. Let's see. Oh yeah, I think we already showed you that. And so this is actually live here as I can come in. Oh, that's it right there. It's what I wanted. So this is the roads again, just to kind of highlight for everybody where we're at. So we started with the belt line, and basically we started with this picture. And it's nice. It's got dimensions on it, so we can scale it to get it to the right place. We copied the roads already. You can see them here. So we were able to line these all up. The point where we lined up everything is here. And so then it becomes a simple matter of tracing over it. So for example, for the right of way for the railroad, which you see here in red, we get, it's simple. It's as accurate as the thing is going to be. Kent showed you this map, which is now laid over and scaled to the same thing. It's not a super perfect match. One interesting thing from this is there's a line running down here that's been scribbled out. You can see there's kind of a wiggly line through it. And we think that was the original alignment for the railroad. And when they wanted to put the Kirkland station in, which is in this area, and yard, they brought it over so it'd be more parallel to the road. Kind of interesting. This is very messy though. And so it's really hard to kind of see what's going on here. And so we'll take that away. Oh, and I'm going to come over here where I have a duplicate of it. And this is what that linen map shows without all the clutter on it. Um, they show a wide spot here, which we presumed was where the station was going to be. And it showed a really long siding of almost some 4,000 feet um, along the side here. Um, we had some information for the station. And this is another Sanborn map of Pale, Washington. And it has the same arrangement of track. So here's the main line and here's a little siding. And it turns out it goes behind the station. And the station and platform are kind of oriented like this. So we stole that from there. And when we modeled it. This is what it looks like. Now there's some differences between this. That big long siding is gone. And we did that, showed it like this because in one of those 162 newspaper articles that Kent was talking about, we learned that when they built this siding, they only built it 1,500 feet long instead of nearly 4,000 feet long. And believe because of the other things they were talking about in the papers at that time, they were having a shortage getting rails. And so we think that they shortened up the siding. And then using the same information we did from the PL map, we spotted the station in here. And so that's what we think the belt line looks like. And it got to this point where the track was all in and the station was in at about September of 1891. And it started in the beginning of 1891 with the grading and then laying track.
I might add just really briefly, one of the reasons we put the station exactly where we did is an early timetable uh, lists it as being, if you do the calculation, it would be exactly at that location.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got the belt line now, and so we have that laid out. And as far as we know, we've traced it over a map that we scaled, so we have no reason to believe that there's really a lot of error in that, other than the innate stuff with the 100-year-old drawings being photocopied. So next part was the mill. And so the starting point for the mill is this Sanborn map that Kent showed you. And you notice it's got a nice scale on the bottom, so we can scale the size of the buildings. Plus, the Anderson pamphlet also gave dimensions for a lot of the buildings. So we can scale the buildings from off of here. There's a bunch of interesting things. So this is a foundry. It's a pattern shop. This is a blacksmith shop, and that's a machine shop. And those buildings got built. There's railroad track on elevated trestle work. You saw some of that in that picture that Kent showed. Now, when Sanborn came out, it was, we think, in the early fourth quarter, maybe, or late third quarter of 1891. And they had actually already stopped working. I don't know if they did it from a seasonal standpoint or not, but there's actually a note in here that talks about the construction starting up again in September in 1892. But at that particular time, there was going to be a boiler house and an engine house. And what that is a steam engine that powered blowers to run the blast furnaces. Something else that shows up and it becomes important somewhat later. There's noted a pile of bricks here covered with boards. Eventually that ends up being covered with a building. It says blast furnaces, so it actually says where the blast furnaces are supposed to go. Tells you where north is, except that it's not really accurate. We'll get into that later. It tells you how far away the sawmill is, which doesn't turn out to be a workable number. But we also get dimensions for the sawmill and a brick plant. Now, the brick plant was meant to make fire brick for the furnaces and various other things like the coke ovens and such. So all that information is on here. So we were able to, we don't know where these are other than they say it's 250 feet from the bunkers. But this whole collection of buildings is drawn up right here. So we take and basically reproduce this in our model and say, okay, this is what this particular part of it looks like. Something I meant to mention earlier and I didn't. So the model is in two parts, and you're looking at the part one model, which looks all the way up to where the project kind of collapsed. So basically, it's what they actually built. Um, Part two of this, which is coming up in another couple of weeks, is where we look at what it might have looked like had they finished it. So this part is only what it looks like when they get for what they actually built. This also shows some tracks. There was a track along here and heads up toward where the sawmill is. There's another track here that comes out of the bunkers. So it's clear that these tracks come off to the south, and that becomes important later. But anyway, so we've got this. And then actually, then it was how to locate it. Now, if you remember, Kent talked about the house on the berm. I'll show you how that fits in here in a minute. So this is that same picture you saw of the mill, and there's a plank road, a wooden plank road, and it runs right up to the corner of the pattern shop. And so from that, then we say, okay, where does the mill go? Okay, and we get this. So here's the mill, straight out from Piccadilly Ave, which is where the plank road was built from, to the corner here. And then there's that house on the berm, which is inside this circle here. If I were to actually turn on well, I'm not going to do it. But the house is here. So we say, okay, well, we thought that this berm had something to do with the trestle, but we weren't completely clear about it. So anyway, this is what we picked as our initial location for the mill. Now there's some other buildings running around, and I started looking at how to locate those. And so I started looking at some of the other pictures. And let's see which one I've got first. So this is one of the pictures that Kent showed you in more detail here. So this little building over here on the side is a brick plant. So that was a building that actually got finished. And I wanted to try to locate that. This is the only picture that shows that building. This is Forbes Lake here. Over here, you can see this is the northwest corner of the machine shop. And then back here, this is a sawmill. And then there's a couple of other buildings here. There's another little building here. We never really have figured out what all of these are. So I've just, at some point or another, we just called them building A, B, C, whatever. But anyway, that's where the brick plant is. And Kent showed you, whoops. This is somewhat interactive. So Kent showed this picture. And again, this is a better picture of the sawmill. So here's the sawmill. And there's this is the engine house here and boiler where they get the power to run the saw. And you can see these are some of the other buildings. And for what it's this part of the picture here, this is some portion of the bunkers in work. So in order to locate these, what I'd wanted to do was to take the pictures and use them to triangulate the location of the brick plant. And to do that, we actually modeled the cameras. Now there's some limitations on that, but one of the cameras or most of the pictures were taken by Harry French. And his camera is actually at the Kirkland Historical Society. And so by measuring off the pictures and knowing roughly where he took them from, I can lay out lines of sight to where different things are. It's very messy, so I'm not going to leave this on very long. But basically, a number of the different pictures they modeled the cameras for. In case of Harry's pictures, it's easy to do because we actually have all the information from his camera. And so when we get there, then we get where the brick plant and so the brick plant is over here, the sawmill is up here. Now these pictures where I'm showing these are where the ultimate location for this was. But as I started doing this triangulation and looking in more detail at the pictures, we came to realize that this location here for the original part of the mill was wrong. And there's one is that when I did that camera, stuff didn't line up right. You know, we knew roughly where the camera was, but couldn't get the mill position to come out right. And when I moved it from up here down closer and closer and closer, the picture got better. The fit got better. And so what that kind of implied was that the mill wasn't in the right place. It needed to go north, and it probably needed to be rotated. And that got further shown by looking at some of the pictures. And we'll go look at that again here in a sec. But for example, if you notice, the extension of the sawmill siding goes up into the lake. Come over here. It's kind of hard to follow, but this right here is the grading where they graded for that siding. The track's not in yet, but that's the grading. And while the sawmill is blocking the lake, it's clear that this is more nearly to the eastern edge of the lake rather than out into the middle of the lake. Along with that, we also went back and we're looking at this building, this picture. And one of the things here that was obvious is, wait a minute, I can see the south side of the pattern shop. This is the pattern shop here. I can see the south side of it. And the only way I can see the south side of it is if the camera is south of the south side of the building. And so from this, it's like, oh, well, maybe the plank road comes in at some sort of an angle. And so I took a guess at where that might go. And I did two different things. One is I rotated it normal to the property line. And then I shoved the bunker all the way up to the property line. And from that, we get this. And I'm going to hide the original location. So that's where we moved. That's where I ended up moving the mill to. Now, it was a little bit better fit for some of the camera pictures, but we still needed to know where it was. And we really don't, like I needed to know east and west where it was. So we went back and looked at some of those aerial pictures, but it's not just the aerial picture, but it was also one with the, okay, where? So I looked at contour maps, and one of the things that kind of struck me is, well, wait a minute, here's this notch in here. And if we go back to this picture, you can see that the mill buildings have been cut into the bank. And it's like, oh, okay, so if they're meant to be cut into the bank, then I need to shove them over here more. And so I did. And we get what I'm calling here now the little steel mill. So I'm going to take the other part of the picture away. It's kind of hard to see it in the contour lines here, but here's the foundry kind of nested right into the corner. And the engine house is nested right into the corner here. So I had originally thought when I saw this, when I first started looking at maps and things, that maybe this had something to do with the bunkers, but it's clear that it was where they cut into the side of the hill to get a flat spot to put all these buildings in. And then it turns out that the house on the berm is right here. So it's actually almost onto the trestle, but it's also on the bank where they had cut into the hill. And so with that, then we say, okay, we now are pretty confident that this is the actual location of the mill. And so we went and we tried looking at the aerial maps again to see if there were some clues as to where they might have gone. And down in here, there's this straight line. And, straight lines don't really exist in nature, but we were thought that that might be a case of a cut and a fill for the track. And so this is a slightly zoomed in version. I didn't explain it when the pictures are really big. The software I've been using here imposes the pixel count on and the pictures get fuzzy. So this is one that's zoomed in a little bit more, so it's not as fuzzy. And you can see there's a line right along here. And we still think that this was a cut and a fill for the tracks. So we put the mill spur through there. And that gives us that for an arrangement of track for the mill. There's actually a little piece missing here. Put that guy back in. So the Sanborn map shows the sawmill track. We call it the sawmill track because it heads up toward the sawmill. And from this guy now, if you remember from the picture, now it looks like it's going right toward the edge of the lake, kind of like it should. And if I put in the plank road, we have another picture that was taken from right about here where the cursor is. That shows the plank road, shows a bend in the plank road just after it crosses the tracks. And so that is kind of where we figured the mill was. And so double check that with one of my other cameras. And that's this one. And nothing is labeled, so you just have to believe me. But these are all from the pictures, are all lines of sight to the various places on the buildings. And it ends up, in this particular case, with a near perfect fit for all the corners of the buildings and stuff. So we're pretty confident that the location of everything finally works out. And so that's sort of the progression for how we got to this point. And then part two is where we get the rest of it from. So there's obviously a whole bunch of other mill buildings that go in here. And our clues from that are in those downtown plat maps. And again, that's something that we're going to go into in the part two of the presentation. But and these are positioned correctly. So here's where downtown is relative to the mill site. So again, these are brought in and scaled to be full size. And they actually show what the mill is like. Well, partially what the mill was like. I don't think this is actually a complete picture. And we'll go into what all the different buildings are and what they do and how we got from here to what we ended up drawing for the full mill configuration.
But yeah, just jumping back, we've had a real dearth, obviously, of very early photos of the Kirkland area. That's just, given technology and the time and where we are or were out on the Washington Territory, they're a little bit hard to come by. So a number of years ago, both Louita Hawkinson, who's on our KHS board, and our collections person, who, by the way, helped us with a ton of the research for this presentation, saw an ad on eBay about the building of the Kirkland town site and these glass plate negatives, which would have been from the late 1880s and early 1890s. And glass plate negatives are what was used before celluloid negatives were around. So what they would do is they would take liquid emulsion and they would apply it to glass plates, and it would then act as film, essentially only on glass instead of the celluloid many of us had when we were younger. So a box or two of these popped up on eBay. Well, actually, there were two boxes, and they had some of these really fantastic shots. And what had happened is Harry French was an early settler who came here with his mother and father. He was grown when they came in 1874 from Maine. And so when the Kirk mill boom all started, he was an early investor. As a matter of fact, he and one of the other settlers, a man named Edward Church, invested in one of the brick buildings at the corner of Market Street and 7th Avenue. Actually, it's the one in which um, the I'm drawing a blank. It's the Masons. It's the Masonic Lodge. Sorry about that, Masons. At the northeast corner of 7th and Market, which of course is still standing. So he had invested in that and was thinking that he was gonna, get a lot from the development that was going to be happening around here. So he walked around with his wooden box camera that Mike has already talked about and took pictures of some of this infrastructure. So they were being sold out of a little kind of an antique store, kind of, knickknack shop down in Chehalis. And we prevailed on the bid. We got them for like 300 something dollars, which was really a lot less than we had expected to have to spend. And I drove down there to pick them up. I didn't want to trust them being shipped. I drove down to receive them and put them in the back of my car with a whole bunch of blankets and everything to pad them. But we went through and we were really surprised to see some of the shots, particularly of the mill site under construction. And those really allowed us to make a lot of the interpretations that we, especially Mike, were able to incorporate into tonight's presentation. So it was real. We to this day, nobody can really figure out how they ended up in Chehalis. Harry French's grandson is actually still alive. He died in 1937, and his one and only grandson is a very nice man named Dave Davis, a retired school teacher, and he had no idea either. His mother had been dead for many years, and his dad lived a little longer. So the best they could think of is maybe his dad had not realized they were in with some stuff he'd given away or something like that, probably back in the 1960s. But we have no idea how they got there, but we found them and now they're part of the collection. And again, they really allow us to learn a lot more about what was going on in the construction stages of the mill site.